I'll explain. I will explain the three ones that people commonly think of, right?
Hmm.
So the normal rule that like 95 upwards of 95% of capital, private capital in the US is raised with is what we call Rule 506B, right?
Welcome to the Wealth Through Real Estate Investing podcast, your source for real-world strategies focused on creating long-term wealth, cash flow, and financial freedom through real estate. Through guidance, tips, and stories of highly successful real estate investors and thought leaders, we provide you the tools to succeed and reach the lifestyle you always wanted. And now your host, Dwaine Clarke.
Hello and welcome to the Wealth Through Real Estate Investing podcast. This is your host, Dwaine Clarke. Today we have a very special guest, Amy Wan of Los Angeles, California, the CEO of Bootstrap Legal. And how are you doing today, Amy?
I'm good. Thanks so much for asking.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. I know we chatted a couple weeks ago. I know you have a very busy schedule, so I really appreciate you spending a little time with our audience to talk about a very important subject, as far as kind of like the legal part of syndications and fundraisings. We have a lot of passive investors that's also listening on to the podcast, so we'll hopefully get some good advice for them as well. But for people that are not too familiar with your background, would you mind just quickly sharing about, how'd you get started and a little bit more about your company?
Of course. So I am a real estate securities attorney by training. Started my career in the federal government, so out in DC doing international regulatory affairs. And when I moved back to California, I became general counsel at a real estate crowdfunding platform. So we were one of the first to utilize Rule 506C, which is one of the accredited crowdfunding regulations that came out as a result of the Jobs Act. And then after that, I went on to become partner at a boutique firm where 90% of our work was in the real estate syndication and fund space. And it was over there that I met and now he's a friend and a client, but at the time he had never done a syndication before. And he came to me one day and said, hey, Amy, I want to raise $300,000. How much are the legal docs going to be? And I said, okay, well, I'll tell you how much it costs. And, I'm not going to be offended if you don't use me, because I know like the legal costs, for small transactions doesn't really make sense. So I told him. And sure enough, he did not do the legal documents that way. He went off and did something else. And the entire experience just got me thinking, like I went to law school to, help the little guy and not, huge corporations or whatever. And I genuinely like to see entrepreneurs grow. I like to see people grow their business, but everyone has to start somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't make sense that you can't be compliant with federal securities law because you're beginning, and the legal transaction cost doesn't make sense, right? That, and inevitably every client always calls at like 4:30 on Friday and they need something for Monday, and there goes my weekend, right? And because I had a tech background from having worked in a startup, I was drafting these documents all day long, and I was like, I think there is a more efficient way to do this, right? And so I mocked up some stuff and basically left and started my own company and law firm. So the company is called Bootstrap Legal, and what we do is we take a hybrid approach towards real estate syndication legal, right? So we use half software, so it's like some basic AI combined with attorney services, so that you're still going to get that one-on-one counseling, a very personalized approach. A human being is still going to sit there and do some drafting and review everything, but at least the first draft is partially automated by software, and that cuts about I would say 20 hours off of the first draft on your average deal. So I'm I'm basically able to bring the cost down a little bit and, you know, essentially turn around documents faster, since whenever folks are raising, time is of the essence. And if you have to close in 60 or 90 days, you don't really want your attorney to spend 45 days, working on documents, right? And so we try to make everything a little bit more efficient.
Yeah, absolutely. The biggest key, like you had said, was the timing. So like if you was doing the deal yourself, you have $1 million and you have no problem, you can be able to do the deal. But for people raising the funds, I mean, there's a lot of moving parts that these syndicators are doing, from continually raising funds to make sure they meet that initial need to fund the deal. So you actually, with this software, this platform is able to cut down on a lot of that, especially with the cost, which is, avoiding a lot of syndicators to get into it. And the main thing of doing it properly, if they, like because kind of leading to my next question, people not doing it correctly and then potentially getting into trouble, you kind of help with that. As far as you do the initial, they go into your system, they're filling out information into your software. What are some of the kind of the hurdles that you're seeing, new syndicators getting into the business, and how can they avoid that?
Yeah. So, if you go on a website like Bigger Pockets, right, the one thing that everyone is always talking about is raising money. Oh my gosh, I need money. Oh, I need a loan. So money is always like the big topic, it seems, in real estate. And a lot of folks, when they start out, they think, oh, I don't know any investors. I've never raised funds before. Where are investors, right? And a lot of them come to me already having come to the conclusion that, hey, I'm going to do my first deal by crowdfunding. And so inevitably, I have to do a lot of consultations where this is a topic that's brought up. And I always tell people crowdfunding is not for beginning syndicators. It's really for much more experienced syndicators, right? And you wouldn't think that, but the thing is, when you are crowdfunding, you're not just doing Google AdWords or posting on LinkedIn, and random anonymous people on the internet are just going to drop $25,000 like that, right? It's not that easy. I wish it were. But no, no matter what you're doing, you're always going to have to build trust. And if you are a first-time syndicator going out and talking to investors, it's going to be extremely difficult to build that trust. That, and if you're trying to go through one of the real estate crowdfunding platforms, they do due diligence on every application they receive, right? 99% of them they reject. And they are also going to look for a track record. So I always tell people, when you're starting out, the investors that you're going to go towards are friends and family, right? Because that's your pre-existing investor network. And hey, get 1 deal, 2 deals under your belt. If they perform well, then you can go talk about that as your track record. Your previous investors will refer other investors because they've been happy. So that's how you really grow your network, right? That, and obviously you can do influencer marketing. But I always tell people, if you're going to start off with crowdfunding as your first deal, I really strongly discourage that. Crowdfunding, I really think, is more for experienced syndicators with a top-notch track record, and to the extent they have a large accredited investor base, either they've exhausted capital or they're crowdfunding 1 deal out of many non-crowdfunded deals to bring in more investors, right? To utilize that advertising feature of crowdfunding or something like that. But it's not just, okay, I'm going to dip my toe in for the first time.
So that the crowdfunding is considered under Regulation A?
Okay. So there are many different types of crowdfunding, actually. So I will explain the the three ones that people commonly think of, right?
Mhm.
So the normal rule that like upwards of 95% of private capital in the US is raised with is what we call Rule 506B, right? So that's not crowdfunding. What Rule 506B is, you cannot advertise, but you can have as many accredited investors as you want. You can have up to 35 non-accredited investors.
Mhm.
All your investors will self-certify. So they check a box on the subscription agreement or something like that where it says, I am or I'm not accredited, right? And you basically have to have what we call a pre-existing relationship with that investor. Now, once you move away from that rule 506B, a lot when people do crowdfund for real estate, there is another exemption that's very similar called Rule 56C, as in cat, right? And under here, you can advertise, right? So now you can post on Twitter and LinkedIn and Facebook and, go talk about it at meetups. However, you can take accredited investors only. So those 35 non-accredited investors, you can't take them anymore. And for these accredited investors, you have to actually verify that they're accredited. So that means they have to, what an accredited investor is it's basically a rich person, but under income tax rules, it means that for the past 2 calendar years, they have earned an income of $200,000 if they file singly, or $300,000 if they file jointly, or their net worth, excluding their primary residence, is in excess of $1 million.
Mhm.
So it's this person has to be pretty well off, right? So 56C is, you can raise as much as you want. It's accredited investors only, but you have to verify them, but you're allowed to advertise, okay? And obviously, because you're advertising, you no longer have to have that pre-existing relationship. Now, that's what we call accredited crowdfunding.
Mhm.
Once we move away from accredited investors and more towards retail investors, the check sizes get smaller. So the next regulation is called regulation crowdfunding, or Reg CF for short. Not many people in the real estate industry use this because although you can take retail investors, now you're basically limited to raising up to $1 million in change every 12 months. And in real estate,
Mhm.
$1 million, especially if you're a serious investor, $1 million doesn't, in
Not gonna
12
get you
months,
far.
doesn't go that very far,
Exactly.
right? It's
Mhm.
not often used. But to the extent it's used, it's really more so with beginning real estate investors. Now, the opposite of that is what we call Regulation A+. And Regulation A+ is basically a mini IPO. You can raise up to $50 million every
Mhm.
12 months, right? You can take non-accredited investors with some caveats, of course. You can advertise. However, you have to go through what we call a qualification process with the SEC. So everything else I described earlier, you either notify the SEC afterwards, or that's in the case of 56B, 56C, right? For regulation crowdfunding, you file what we call a Form C beforehand, but that's it. It's not a big thing. The SEC doesn't have to approve it or anything. With the Regulation A+, you have to get the filing qualified or basically approved by the SEC, and there is a whole back and forth comment process.
Mhm.
So for a very vanilla deal, you're looking at a minimum of a 4 to 6 month process to be able to actually raise that money, which basically means you're not going to use this for single asset syndication, right?
Like funds.
You don't have that time. It's really going to be much more of a fund. And I say, whereas regulation crowdfunding was for beginners, Regulation A+ is for influencers and really experienced people, because the legal fees for this are going to be higher, usually minimum 35 to 50,000 minimum, right? And that's not with all the bells and whistles.
Mhm.
And so to justify all of that and the ongoing reporting that you might have to do, you're going to really want to make sure that you're a sophisticated shop, that you have capital to work with, you're organized, all of those sorts of things.
And is that both? So you have to have it for a state level, or is just like on the federal side? So say if you have to just raise funds from just California investors or Connecticut investors, does that cover nationwide?
Right. So all of these that I've talked about, they're all federal exemptions, which means you can raise nationwide. Now, Regulation D, it's just, there's something that we call preemption. It's just, the states really can't say anything or stop you, except that at the very end you have to like pay these filing fees, because that's how the states make money, right? Regulation crowdfunding, you can also raise nationwide. Now, Regulation A+, you can raise nationwide, but you have to indicate generally the states from which you want to take investment. And there are different types of Regulation A+ filings. There's something called Tier 1, Tier 2, right? Depending on which one you select, you may actually have to deal with states if you're doing a Tier 1.
Wow.
Which, is not great, dealing with a ton of states, even though now that process is supposed to be streamlined. It's, a lot of a lot of attorneys I know, they all just tell their clients, just do a Tier 2.
Yeah, I can imagine. Let's see how complicated that is to go through that process. You guys say you got to be very sophisticated, have some capital, know what you're doing, and kind of have a process and formula. Does that also include you getting routinely audited and things like that?
Right. So, for Regulation A+, there are audit obligations and ongoing reporting obligations. And depending on whether you do Tier 1 or Tier 2, they can differ. For Regulation crowdfunding, depending on how much you're trying to raise, there are different thresholds, which with different obligations that you have to meet, right? For some, you need financial statements. For others, I can't remember off the top of my head, but basically the more you're raising, the more you have to show. With Regulation D, really you just have to disclose whatever is going to be relevant and material to the investors. So there are no audit obligations or anything like that.
As far as the documents for the investor has to see, what are the type of documents that you can see? I know like operating agreements, if you're doing like
Right.
regular stuff. Any additional ones that you can talk about?
So I'm going to talk about the documents at least for 56B, 56C, because that's most likely what people are going to be doing in the syndication space. So, it starts off with the PPM, and the PPM is this, horrendous, monstrous, 40 to 100 page document. And it basically discloses all the details of the deal, but also discloses every single risk that can possibly come forward, because we don't want investors to sue when the deal goes sideways and say, oh, we didn't know that. We didn't know that was a risk. You didn't tell us. We're going to sue you now, and then you have the subscription agreement. You have probably multiple operating agreements, because you want at least one for the actual entity that people are investing into. You would have at least one with the manager. Sometimes people have multiple properties going on. Sometimes people have more than one entity involved. So it really depends on the deal structure. To the extent that you're taking a foreign investor, you may want a foreign investor supplemental questionnaire just to ask an additional couple questions. Those are the main documents. And then for your investors, they're obviously going to want to see an investor deck or summary. And that's, it's usually like a 20-page PowerPoint or like PDF document that has, the sponsor's biography, financial projections, information about the property, about the area, about the business plan. It covers distributions to investors, all that stuff from the PPM, but in a more digestible fashion.
So as far as like a passive investor side, I know you had mentioned like the investment deck to kind of, detail some of the kind of the overview of the investment. Is there anything that from a passive investor side that they should be, more concerned with looking through and, be able to understand the investment?
Well, I would say that investors should be able to understand everything in order to invest, right? Although I know that is not always the case. At the absolute minimum, I would think that investors should want to very clearly understand the distribution structure and the fee structure. They will want to understand their voting rights, especially to understand what happens if things go wrong, right? They will want to due diligence the sponsor and understand their track record, what the exit plan is, how long this investment is supposed to last. They should be asking the sponsor questions about, what happens if things go sideways. Have they gone sideways before? Have you handled it? Things like that, and just the general, all the numbers.
As far as like, if you can explain your platform, because the thing that I found very interesting was the kind of the turnaround time. If we kind of talked about that before, compared to going with a traditional attorney. Can you explain kind of how your system works? Like if a new client wanted to, get with you.
Yeah, sure. So basically, the process starts when people go to my website. There's a button that says schedule consultation. They can basically choose from my calendar a 15-minute window. I'll talk to them, and to the extent that they want to move forward, I basically send them a digital engagement letter to electronically sign and wire instructions. We do flat fee for all of our deals. And then once all that's taken care of, I basically send them an online questionnaire, right? And I call this like TurboTax for real estate syndication. So people go in, they fill out the questionnaire to the best of their ability, and then they're going to make another appointment to talk to me again. Because, I'm sure for those of us who have used TurboTax, there's been questions where like, I don't know how to answer this, right? So I will get on the phone with the client and, run through the questionnaire, make sure they filled it out correctly, answer any questions that they have. And then I basically ask them for the documents that they need to send me. So it might be a purchase agreement, a loan term sheet if they have it, the investor deck, entity formation papers to the extent they have formed entities. If not, we do that for them. And then, once I have all of that, then, I do things on my side. And for a standard deal, we try to turn things around in basically 3 business days for the first draft. After that, it's the regular back and forth attorney process until we get the documents exactly how they need to look. Then people go, they raise their money. And then when they're done, they will come back to me and tell me, hey, I'm done raising money. And I'll basically send them a sheet to fill out. And that sheet gives me the information I need to basically go and do the federal and state filings on their behalf.
And as far as, is this like kind of like, say, the template? Are they able to say if they did multiple transactions, multiple investors, different types of deals, or is it different per deal that they have to fill out?
So it is, I've had clients who, even though, they're doing oftentimes the same structure, there's always going to be something interesting or bespoke about a deal, right? My underlying software, I basically parsed out all the logic from like 20 years of real estate syndication documents or real estate syndication legal docs, right? And right now, I think we have around like 700 or 800 different variables to choose from. And that's, I use the 80-20 rule, right? Like I'll automate it if this shows up in, 80% of deals. If not, if it's a very one-off thing, I don't automate it. And that's just what I will draft in a bespoke manner or tweak on the documents myself, right? But there is, normally this stuff costs a lot and takes a lot of time for a reason, because it's not very easy to templatize. It's very detailed and nuanced work. I'm just trying to make it a little bit faster, a little bit more efficient.
I'm pretty sure it'll make your life a little bit easier too. I mean, you still have to do a lot of work, but like I said, you're automating a lot of that process. I say newer investors that are coming into the game now are kind of used to this kind of platforms where it's kind of more automated and they're able to do stuff more streamlined. Like we had mentioned before, timing is a big issue, especially when you're raising funds for large, complicated deals. And, depending on how much moving parts, it's just going to take a lot of work. So, I never seen like a platform like yours. When I started reading more about it, I was like, wow, this is really very amazing, especially on a cost savings basis where, like you mentioned, newer investors can get in. More average investor that, educate themselves and become more well, they can take advantage of these opportunities. And, and of course, it's a benefit to the investors that they're working with as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
So as far as, on a personal side, besides when you're not working on deals and working on contracts, what is Amy doing?
Oh my goodness. So I actually have a baby. He's about to turn 12 months. So the past
Nice.
12 months of my life has been a lot of mothering.
Mm-hmm.
But the good thing now is, because my practice is so automated, it gives me a lot more personal time. And aside from that, because my practice is so much more streamlined now, I actually have another company. It's in a totally different space. It's in the blockchain space.
Very cool. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so it's called Sagewise. We started off building dispute resolution infrastructure for smart contracts. I know this is like a totally different planet for a lot of people in real estate, so it's okay if you don't understand any of this stuff. And lately, we've kind of shifted a little bit more into basically providing outsourced investor support and compliance for tokenized securities and digital assets. So
Wow.
I'm sure you've seen, there's a lot of talk in the space right now about, tokenized real estate interests and stuff like that. I think all of that, is still many years away in terms of actually going mainstream, but a lot of people are building the infrastructure for that new industry now. And so, it's something we'd like to be involved with.
Wow. I'm starting to read more about it, learn more about it. Of course, you're light years advanced than me and all of these listeners. As far as you seem like a very systematized, organized person. What's kind of like your morning routine that makes you so successful?
Well, I've been trying to perfect it over the past year, especially since the baby and, with the sleep deprivation, that's been crazy. But on an ideal morning, I'll get up at 6:30, and I went to a Tony Robbins event recently, and so now every morning I do like a 15-minute priming exercise. It helps me because I'm not great at meditation. And that priming exercise is, I think, basically a combination of it's meditation and like a gratitude exercise. And then I make my to-do list for the day. I do dinner prep, so I don't have to, come home and, just be flying everywhere. And then to me, that's a good start to the day.
Yeah, the reason why I ask this question, every person I've done an interview that is very successful, they have the same kind of structure, the gratitude, meditation, exercise, or, structuring their day. So it's just excellent to hear that you're saying that as well. It's, like I said, it's a common routine amongst people that are very active and doing a lot of big things. So that's very cool. You had mentioned that your daughter, and that's kind of leading to my next question is, what are you most grateful for?
I am most grateful for my husband, my baby, who's turning 1 this weekend, and for the wonderful house that we live in,
Absolutely.
and my excellent childcare.
That's
Could
what
not
needed.
do this without childcare.
Exactly. Amy, it was a pleasure to speak with you. Kind of loaded us with a whole bunch of, information, good advice. And of course, this is not a legal advice call, and we encourage you to contact you as well. Your platform is very interesting. And like I said, I think it's a game changer in the industry that people need to kind of understand that it's out there. And, I've never seen anybody else that's doing it on your level, especially, with working with investors and now, blockchain and all the different types of technology. So how do we get in touch with you?
Yeah, sure. Well, people can always talk to me by going to the website and scheduling a consultation, but my email address is super simple. It's just Amy, AMY, at bootstraplegal.com. And I'm also on LinkedIn and Twitter, Facebook, although I tried to keep that a little bit more personal. But if people find me on LinkedIn, just make sure you write a message, because I just get so many messages now, and most of them are ads. So.
All right, awesome. I really appreciate you taking the time. I'll hopefully be able to connect later in the future. I encourage all of our listeners and all of our investors to check you out and speak with you and get any advice that you can offer. Again, I really appreciate your time and look forward to talking to you at another point.
Thanks for having me.
All right, thank you and take care.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Wealth Through Real Estate Investing podcast. Don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review on iTunes or the listening platform of your choice. Also, please check us out at DwaineLClarke.com, as well as find us on Facebook for more useful content and resources.